from West Virginia Public Broadcasting.
Welcome to the 2016 West Virginia Gubernatorial Forum, a Viewpoint special hosted by West Virginia Public Broadcasting. I'm Ashton Marra. This hour-long forum will give the candidates the opportunity to share and discuss their stances on some of the most pressing issues that will face the next governor of the state of West Virginia. All 5 of the candidates on the ballot this November were invited to participate in this forum. Candidates from the Constitution, Libertarian, and Mountain parties accepted our invitation. We begin with Phil Hudok, the Constitution Party's candidate for governor. Mr. Hudok, thanks for being here.
Well, thank you, Ashton. Glad to be here. It's a breath of fresh air.
So this is your first attempt at running for governor?
No, it isn't.
No, it's not.
2004. I tried to get on the ballot.
That's
right. Didn't make it.
So you attempted in 2004. You did make the ballot this year. You also made the ballot in 2014 to run for U.S. Senate.
That's correct.
Still, if some of our viewers aren't aware of who you are, maybe they don't know you so well, why don't you start by telling us a little bit about yourself and a little bit about why you decided to run for governor?
Sure. Well, I taught school for 40 years. Taught physics, chemistry, biology, but physics was my field. And I realized that I have to obey the laws of physics or things don't go very well, okay? And I look at our country and I look at the problems we have. 17 wars in my life, 80% of my life we've been at war. I was born in 1950, and that's when the Korean War started. I look at our debt, we're the largest debtor country in the world now, and I look at our incarceration rate, and we have the largest incarceration rate in the world, so there's something really wrong. And I found out that we're just really not following the rule of law. The rule of law is important. If we don't have the rule of law, we'll have chaos. And I think we also have, tied in with that, a moral meltdown. And contracts will not work when people don't have a moral compass. I don't care whether it's a husband and a wife or the government and the people. It just doesn't work because you have to have a moral character, be a person with convictions, live up to your word, and the rule of law is very important. And so, we have a Constitution. I'm in the Constitution Party. I'm vice chairman of the Constitution Party, and the Constitution matters. Ignore it, it'll go away.
So let's start into the issues, and I'd like to start with the budget because I think that's one of the biggest issues facing the next governor of the state of West Virginia. This summer, lawmakers spent weeks working on a budget in a special session to close a more than $400 million budget gap. As a result of that session, only one revenue increasing measure was passed, and that was an increase to the cigarette tax. That one fix won't be enough to fix the fiscal climate of the state of West Virginia. So should you become the next governor of the state, where will you look for new revenue for West Virginians?
I actually have an idea that I think is unique, and I think it would help the state quite a bit. I believe that, as Ronald Reagan said, I'm here from the government and I'm here to help are some of the most dangerous words, okay? I don't think government can create government jobs, okay? I think when government has a level playing field and when government takes away the obstacles for people in business and whatever. However, there is one thing I would do that wouldn't be for the economy, but it would actually be a big boon for our economy, and that is, I'm for the legalization of marijuana, okay? I do believe that hemp should be our #1 cash crop, and as governor, and it's not because I'm pro smoking marijuana. I don't drink, I don't smoke, and I don't think anyone should do anything that's a crutch, okay? Because you'll atrophy if you have a crutch. You won't be strong. However, I don't think it's the government's job to tell us what we can put on our own bodies. If I want to take an experimental drug, why does the government tell me I can't use a certain drug or whatever? So, we legalize cigarette smoking and we legalize alcohol, and yet those are very addictive, And I'm not pushing marijuana. I'm not saying, but however, it has good uses. And one of the things I would do is I would pardon everyone who's in prison right now that is a cost to the state and make them productive people, we should be responsible for what we do. We shouldn't be relying on the government. So more government is not going to solve our problem. It's less government. So let's get back to the Constitution. Let's get back to the rule of law. Let's get back to what our founders gave us. And let's get back to personally being responsible for what we do.
So let's be clear, though, the legalization, you think of both recreational and medicinal marijuana.
Yes, I do.
Okay. On the opposite side of the issue, then, is government spending. And at the beginning of the month, West Virginia's Revenue Secretary announced that in the first 3 months of this fiscal year, collections already came in more than $81 million short of revenue estimates. This downward trend is likely to continue into the next administration. So if you were the next governor, where would you propose making cuts to government?
I think we really need to look very strongly at cuts. I think there are places where we can cut. Government waste, a bloated government, specific places where they need cut. I don't know that at this point, but I do know there is a lot of waste. There are a lot of commissions and things that meet that don't really have any positive aspect to us. And I think that, again, government, just less government is what we need to do.
So safe to say you're an advocate for a small government. Do you believe there's a point where small government and the amount of services that the people of West Virginia rely on, is there a balance to be found there?
We have to protect our water. We have to protect our resources. So I think we need to prioritize where the money should go. And I think we have a real problem with water. We have a lot of outside countries actually controlling water in some places, and I think that's atrocious. I think we should control our water. And I taught science for 40 years, and I believe in good science and not politicized science, and saying this is true, but it's because of politics that they're skewing the numbers or whatever. I've seen a lot of bad science. I call it pseudoscience. And as a scientist, I say let's keep politics out of science, and then protect our environment. We're going to have to allocate money for that. We're going to have to watch our resources. But as far as business, I think they're being hindered. I don't believe in giving tax breaks to certain specified businesses. You know what I mean? I think it's kind of like George Carlin said, it's a big club and you ain't in it. So, I'm all for small businesses. Since 1972, I've had a photography business called Century Photo. Okay, so I've been in business for 44 years. At times, I had trouble with just the regulations from the state and constantly changing things. I think we need a good business climate and let the people do what they do best. But yes, we still need some oversight of the government to make sure that we protect our environment and we keep things have a level playing field. That we don't favor one group over another.
So Governor Tomlin has spent several days this month on a mission trip to Ireland and to the United Kingdom. And his goal is to strengthen the relationships between the businesses who are there, who have already invested in West Virginia, and try to attract more investment to the state. Mm-hmm. As the next governor, you'll likely also be asked to travel to these foreign countries to attract businesses, to strengthen relationships. How do you sell West Virginia to other countries or to businesses just in general to get them to come here?
Well, I think the government needs to be a resource for the people, for the people of the state and the businesses of the state. I was on the planning commission of Randolph County, and that's one of the things we wanted was, to have the services available in our county, for businesses to thrive. And I think, that's what we need to look at is our transportation corridors, our roads, our infrastructure. And then go to these places and say, we have the infrastructure here and we have the people. I do believe that we need to revamp our education. I taught for 40 years and I am appalled at our, quote, public education, which is now more government education. And we need to fix education so that we have people who are educated, a good workforce, but also good business people that are free to do business. And I think the governor can be an ambassador for the state and help be a resource. Not create jobs, but create an environment and an education and a resource for the people.
Well, let's talk about education a little bit then, since you bring that up. You know, I presented this question to the two major party candidates during their first televised debate, but I think it's one that all of the candidates need to have an opinion on. You know, we continue to talk about budget cuts, and the state's institutions of higher education over the past several years have been cut by some 23%. A lot of them are raising tuition then to offset those costs. But, you know, we're looking at this idea of investing in a workforce, a higher education workforce that comes out with a professional degree, or the idea of investing in a workforce that is skills-based labor. As we see additional cuts to these higher education facilities, do you place a priority in one over the other?
Skills versus
versus a traditional, somebody who might go to a four-year institution over a skills-based job?
No, I don't stress one over the other, you know. I taught at a school where we had a VOTEC right next door, and I think both schools, both a high school, and I was teaching physics and chemistry, so I was getting, you know, the college, a lot of times engineering students or whatever. However, there are people that don't need to go to college. They're going to be very productive. But the problem with education is we have the federal government involved in education, and I think they have caused more problems with our education system. I did a seminar called America's Zombie Nation years ago, and one of the speakers was Charlotte Pritt, and she was in the Reagan Education Department. As a matter of fact, she had been the president of the Board of Education of Maine, and then she went into Reagan's Education Department because Reagan said he was going to get the federal government out of education. Okay, so that's what she thought. What she found out was she saw a plan to use technology, and especially computers, to micromanage education from the federal level, okay? And so she wrote a book, The Deliberate Dumbing Down of America. And she took the documents from the Department of Health, Education, and Welfare, federal government, and said, look, here's the plan. It's not to get us out, it was actually to control us. So, you know, I've had conversations with board members and everything, and they've said, well, what do we need to do? And I say, well, quit taking the federal money. Let's run our schools.
Do you think that's possible? Do you think it's possible for the state of West Virginia to run our school system without federal dollars?
It's less than 20%, yeah, depending. And some school systems in Pennsylvania, I know, actually, do not take any federal money. I have three daughters that went to college, and the one college that I wish I'd known about was Hillsdale, because they take no federal money whatsoever. They actually finance the education for all their students through their own institution, through their alumni and everything. They do all their own funding. And they give classes on the Constitution and things that are considered politically incorrect in other places. So, you know, as little government as possible, and I think West Virginia has been hurt by an overreaching federal government. You know, we got the 10th Amendment that says, you know, everything that's not delegated to the federal government is up to the states and the people themselves. That's where we're hurting. It's the Constitution. The great things in this West Virginia Blue Book that I found that are actually unique. Some of the things in our Constitution are unique in the United States and very important. And one of those definitely I want to bring up.
Let's talk a little bit about another announcement that came from the governor's office this week. Governor Tomlin and the State Department of Health and Human Resources announced that the state would follow new opioid prescribing guidelines that came from the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. And those guidelines encourage doctors in the state not to think of opioids, things we think about like Oxycontin, those kinds of painkillers, as the #1 choice when treating chronic pain in patients. So I'd like to start with a brief reaction to how you feel about those guidelines, and then tell me, what other steps do you think are necessary to fight the opioid epidemic here in West Virginia?
First of all, I was listening to a talk show, and they were interviewing a person in Harrison County in the police department, sheriff's department, and they were saying, we're losing the war on drugs. We're losing it. You know, we've seen a lot of what's happened in the news lately. And he said, well, You know, all we can do is education, treatment, and law enforcement. Okay, education, treatment, and law enforcement. And Ashton, that's not the whole answer. Okay, you know, if people didn't want to take drugs, if they just said no, you know, and I think we have a moral meltdown, and I think the families have been weakened. I think that's one reason we have the drug problems. The economy is bad. That's another reason. You know, people they don't have hope. They don't have hope. We need to get back to a country, a world where, you know, the families were strong. You used to be able to get heroin in a drugstore without a prescription. So I don't believe it's just availability. I mean, yeah, that enters in, but it's what is the moral fabric of our society? You know, again, when morals break down, no contracts work, whether it's, you know, husband and wife, government and people, or the society and even children. They look at it and it's like, well, they see what's going on the national level and they see different things happening and they say, there is no rule of law. Well, we need the rule of law, and we need, you know, one of the things in the West Virginia Blue Book, I got to bring this up, is Article 6, Section 47, which says incorporation of religious denominations prohibited. Churches cannot incorporate. Okay? We can't have muzzled churches and a moral society. Even Donald Trump brought this up, the Johnson Amendment from 60 years ago, which created church incorporation. He said they're afraid to say things because of the IRS. Okay? Because a church, when they incorporate, it's a creation of the government, and they're under corporate contract. Okay? And so in West Virginia, because churches are prohibited from incorporating, we don't have to have something from Donald Trump or the national level to get back to free churches and a more moral society. That's what built this country, was the churches. Okay, so I have a case in the state Supreme Court right now, 15-0491, and I brought that up to them among other things, and I get no answer.
Mr. Hudok, we have just about a minute left together, so I'm going to ask you in that
Sure.
time, please tell the voters, you know, what is it that you bring to the table? Why should they vote for you in November?
They should vote for me in November because, as George Carlin said, it's a big club and you ain't in it. And I'm not in the big club, okay? What we see are two candidates who are chosen, I call them the chosen candidates, who were in a debate that I was excluded from. This forum, I asked specifically to Suzanne that everyone be included in this forum. Okay, because I believe to discriminate against them and not invite them to this would be reverse discrimination, and discrimination is discrimination. However, I want to drop a big bombshell, and that is that Metro News has not included me in their poll. And they haven't included me in any of their polls, okay? And I have a text that was sent to Hoppy Kercheval saying, you know, this person said, you know, why do you interview Phil? And he said, I barely mention him and I'm not having him on my show. That's what he texted back. And then just recently, okay, a email was sent to Hoppy Kercheval thanking that I wasn't in the Metro News poll, the recent Metro News poll. And Hoppy said, yes, we left him out on purpose. I was left out of the polls, and the polls are a big part of the democratic process. I think the democratic process is being subverted. I'm a rule of law person. I've had 3 cases in the Supreme Court. I will not back down. I will not compromise. And there are times when you have to say no.
Mr. Hudok, I'm sorry that's our time today, but I do appreciate you being here. Thank you for speaking with us.
I appreciate it.
Our next participant this hour is David Moran. He represents the Libertarian Party. So, Mr. Moran, you first ran for governor in 2012, your second attempt this time, but there might be some viewers who aren't really aware of who you are. Let's start by telling us a little bit about yourself and why you decided to run for governor.
Thank you, Ashton. Thank you for having me here today. Well, first of all, I'm a farmer from Preston County, and my wife and I raise sheep and alpaca. And other than that, I'm also a college professor, studying and working at West Virginia University. And besides that, I'm running for governor. Now, I did this in 2012, as you said, And the purpose in doing that was to get at least 1% of the vote in a gubernatorial election, and that's the state requirement for a party to be an official party. So the Libertarian Party is now an official party in West Virginia, and this year I'm just running because I really think that we need some choice.
Why don't you tell us a little bit about what the Libertarian Party stands for?
Sure. Libertarian Party, in the very basic sense, rests on one principle, that you should have the right to do whatever you want to do, as long as you don't infringe upon the right for somebody else to do the same thing. Now, I say it a little bit differently. I say that you ought to have the right to run your life however you like, as long as you don't mess up somebody else's life or their environment or the world around them or whatever it happens to be. As long as you're doing that, you're doing the right thing for yourself, for your family, and also for the community.
Well, let's dive into the issues a little bit, see how you put that principle to work. This summer, lawmakers spent several weeks in a special budget session attempting to close a more than $420 million gap to put a budget forward for this year. And as a result of that session, they only passed one revenue increasing measure, an increase to the state's cigarette tax. As the next governor, where will you find new revenue for the state?
I'm going to turn it around on you, Ashton. The real issue here is that we're spending more money than we can actually raise in revenue. Right, we were $400 million short, but the job of the governor is to identify that that is happening in advance, not after the fact, and to start making the moves to cut back on those expensive items that we have that are not in the best interests of the state, not dealing with the future of West Virginia. So that's number one. That's where we have to really begin.
So tell us where those places are. Have you identified places where the government can save?
I have. In fact, we've played this game in my campaign group, and we said, what would you cut? And we very, very easily found $400 million. That was no problem. We could go all the way up to in the billions, 1.4 billion. Let me say that the real issue that we have here is that the amount of money that we raise in taxes is $4.5 billion a year. But we spend $10.5 billion a year. And that $6 billion, that extra money, comes from the federal government by and large. So we are, in a sense, a ward. We have to learn how to control ourselves and our appetites, and we have to make the best use of that money so that we're actually growing our state, not just doing programs that are imposed upon us.
Well, I'm going to push you here for a couple of specifics. Give
Sure.
me an example or two of where we can cut.
Well, one of the places we can cut is by reducing the amount of incarceration that we have for things that are elective problems. And this usually goes into drugs, elective misuse of drugs. And then we treat that as a criminal crime. Rather than a health problem or a motivational problem, we treat it as a criminal activity. And so here is an area where we are incarcerating way too many people, and for no good reason. They don't come out of prison in any better shape than they went in, but it's costing us an enormous amount of money to do that. And it's not just in the prisons themselves, it's also in the whole legal structure that we have to support, and it's in our law enforcement procedures and everything.
Well, with that in mind, both of your fellow third-party candidates have said that they support the legalization of marijuana, both for medicinal and recreational purposes. The two major party candidates have said that they would accept medicinal purposes but are unsure about recreational uses. Where do you stand on that issue?
Well, I'd like to say decriminalization is what we have to look at. And legalization, that's a different issue. Decriminalization means that we have to make sure that we are not just taking people off the street for simple possession of something that they use for themselves and are not in any way being detrimental to society. Stop doing that. Legalization requires a whole lot of other considerations. We need to develop standards for inebriation under drugs so that we are not out there on the highways driving around under the influence of any drug, whether it's alcohol or tobacco or marijuana.
So do you think by legalization, or excuse me, you said decriminalization. I'm assuming you think that means there will be less people in the jail and the prison system here in the state of West Virginia. That seems like a pretty straightforward thing.
Right.
But you also say that you stand for increased penalties for people who are selling drugs, correct?
Absolutely. In fact, I think that people that are selling drugs and making money off of selling drugs in this state should be held responsible for the cost of the drug problem that we have. Let us tax them, not ourselves, and make sure that if somebody is selling drugs in this state and they are caught and found guilty of that activity, that they have to pay the penalty. Not by going to prison, yes, by going to prison, but beyond that, all right, beyond that, actually pay the financial cost of what they are doing to our state.
So I'd like to talk about something that's going on here right now. Governor Tomlin, he's overseas, traveling to Ireland and to the UK to both strengthen relationships between businesses that are already investing in West Virginia and try to attract new businesses. The two main party candidates in this race, they say, I want to be a salesman for the state of West Virginia to attract new investments. What kind of salesman would you be? How would you sell West Virginia?
Well, the first thing I would do is, before I sold West Virginia, I would have to convince West Virginia that we have to move into the future. We can't sit back and wait for business to come to us. And one of the things that we need to do in that capacity is to look at what the industries are going to be like in the future. Manufacturing is going to be entirely different in the next 10 to 20 years. We're going to see the advent of 3D printing and localized manufacturing, as well as the telecommunications system that we've built up to be able to make that possible. One of the things that I've taken an initiative right now is that I have a proposal before an international foundation for a grant, $100 million grant, that would teach West Virginians as well as other people in rural environments how to make use of the new technology, not just try to capitalize upon the old one. And that's something that I'm working at this moment. Whether I'm governor or not, I'll be very happy to pass that on to whoever happens to be in the State House.
Aside from this grant, what other policies do you put in place to ensure that there's a workforce here in West Virginia that's prepared for those new types of industries?
Motivation is the first thing. I mean, look at what's happening in our poor McDowell County. We have an unemployment rate of about 35%, and we have a drug addiction rate in the 40%, something like that range. They go together. They go together because once you lose the incentive to do things for yourself and to take care of your family and to work and to build a good life, then you start to slide into other areas. So motivation is the first thing. Comes from the governor, the chief executive. That has to be the chief motivator in this state. Next, it comes from the educational program. In addition to teaching things, our teachers have to teach motivation, how to work to make your own life better.
One thing I think is a legitimate question for all of these third-party candidates is, the governor, as he said, quite clearly leads the state in so many different ways. But one is by appointing people to things like cabinet secretary positions, people who run the state agencies. He points people to the State Board of Education to run the education system in the state. None of your parties have held this kind of office before. So how do you find people who have the experience to be in those kinds of positions?
I want to preface this by saying that for 150 years, we've had Republican Democratic leaders in this state, presumably very skilled, and yet in so many ways we are in last place. If our football team was in last place for 150 years, would you hire the same coaches back again? No, I don't think so. My first act as governor is not necessarily to put myself forward as the great expert, but to call for a complete review of every program that we have and every panel and every commission and every department, and determine which ones publicly, visibly, and with the public seeing the whole thing, which ones are the ones that we really need, that are leading to a future for West Virginia, rather than just perpetuating the same processes, political processes, that we've seen in the past.
So then, once you do make those determinations, who leads those agencies? Do you look to people who have Democratic and Republican connections, or do you have enough people within your party to lead the state forward?
No, there are not enough people in the Libertarian Party to lead this state forward, let me tell you that. And so they would have to come from any other party. But I wouldn't look at that from that perspective. I wouldn't be looking at whether somebody came from a particular party or whether they had an allegiance to a party. And I'm very, very fortunate that I don't have any back pay that I have to pay. I don't really have anyone that I have to patronize. There's nobody that I have to make promises to, because there's nobody there that has made promises here. So it doesn't, I'm free to look for the very best people anywhere to lead this state out of this last position we're in and into first place.
Let's talk a little bit about the environment. West Virginia's current Attorney General is embroiled in a federal court battle that challenged the Obama administration's Clean Power Plan. These are federal rules for coal-fired power plants to reduce carbon emissions. The next governor of West Virginia doesn't necessarily get to decide whether the state remains involved in this court decision, and it's likely that it'll go before the U.S. Supreme Court during the next governor administrations. Do you support the state's current fight against the Clean Power Plan?
I support clean power plants. All right, let's put it that way, first of all. And the state of West Virginia should be in a position to actually lead in this, rather than following along and trying to maintain some compliance to rules. Rather lead it. And why not? We have the opportunity to do that. And we have a nation, presumably, that's calling upon us to do it. So would I fight the control of the federal government over the state's initiative? Yes. But would I at the same time promote the state to take the strongest stance that they possibly could? Yes.
So you believe the state can meet these standards, should be reducing its carbon footprint?
I think so. I think so, without a doubt. I mean, there's no question about it. Now, technologically, this is difficult. It is difficult, and it does cost money. What does that mean? It means that power becomes more expensive when you have to do that. Are we the only ones that are going to have to do it? No. Everybody's going to have to do that. And so the question of economy, of the cost of doing it, I think is a moot point.
Although there is a need for increased economic development across the state, it's one of the top campaign issues this season, there are also projects like the construction of natural gas pipelines or the construction of Corridor H that have heightened the concerns of environmental groups, of property owners. As a governor, how do you weigh the economic impact of a project with the environmental impact?
Well, let me go to the economic part first, because I think that, I'm totally opposed to the state taking land by eminent domain without the appropriate compensation. If you look at the power lines, when a power line is being put up and everybody is opposed to the power line, all you have to do is make the one simple change of saying, we will give you free power if you let us put a power line across your property, and all of a sudden, there's no problem any longer. It's compensation. That's really the most important thing. Now, that's just on the economic side. Okay, on the environmental side, I think we have to look at the nature of this state. Our state is special. If you want to build a road in Kansas, it's fairly simple. You just roll it out across the prairie. We have to move mountains in order to build roads, and we have to move mountains in order to build pipelines and anything else. We have to recognize those differences, and it's more difficult, more expensive, and there could be greater environmental impact when you do that in a state like West Virginia than in an easier state. That has to be recognized. You can't treat all of them exactly the same.
I'd like to present you with a question that I asked the two major party candidates during their debate, and yet it's a little bit complicated, so bear with me. Since 2008, West Virginia has cut the budgets of both 2- and 4-year institutions by 23%. These are the same institutions that the state is relying on to both create a professional workforce with those more traditional degrees and to retrain workers who may have been laid off, have lost their jobs like in the coal industry. These institutions are more than likely going to experience cuts into the future as well. So with the budgetary restrictions in mind, as the next governor, which system takes priority? A system that's there to retrain workers, or a system that's there to create an educated workforce of the future?
Wow, and I'm supposed to choose between these two, is that right?
I know, it's tough.
Okay, well, let me preface it in the following way. Why is, this is a rhetorical question, why is it that the cost of education has become so expensive? Why is it the most inflationary thing in our society? By and large, it's because of the increased amount of administration that we have to do. rules and regulations that have to be followed. Rather than just simply teaching and getting things done and educating people, we are spending more and more time and more money on the administration. As governor, one of the things I'm going to do is to look at the value of that administration and make sure that it actually pays off. If an administrator is making 4 times as much money as somebody who is teaching, then I am opposed to that, and I would find ways to change that. Okay, now let's go to the real question here. Which of these two do I choose? Well, the answer is obviously both, but you want me to select one. And I think that what I would do in the state of West Virginia at this particular point is to look at the highest technology training that we could have, both in the professional area and also in the same time in the area of training people in the workforce. To do that, you have to look at new ways that the workforce is going to work and act in the future. There are areas that they have to be trained in. Robotics in our mineral extraction arena is going to happen. There's no doubt about it. And so the people that are being trained in those areas have to be trained in robotics and electronics and in communications. Those are the areas that are going to be most important. And they're pretty much the same things that you're training when you are training professionally.
So we have just about a minute left in our time together. Right. I'm going to ask you to speak directly to the voters of West Virginia. Why should they vote for you?
The voters of West Virginia are probably the most wonderful people in the whole world, but they are suffering right now from lack of choice and lack of presentation of the real issues, and it's tough. I thank you for bringing us on at this time, because we are speaking not in sound bites, not in slogans, but we are doing everything possible to reflect the needs of this state and to present real solutions to the people of West Virginia. And that's what I'll do. I'm not going to be traveling as governor except to the 55 counties in this state. That's where I'll spend my time traveling.
Mr. David Moran, the Libertarian Party candidate for governor, thank you so much.
Thank you, Ashton.
Our final participant in this hour-long forum is Charlotte Pritt. She's representing the Mountain Party on the ballot for governor. Thank you so much for being here.
Oh, I'm so happy that I was able to make it.
So let's start just simply, yours is a little bit more of a familiar name than some of the other third-party candidates. But even so, let's tell the audience a little bit about yourself and why you decided to run for governor.
Well, actually, I got drafted to run for governor. At our convention in July, we thought that Reverend Jim Lewis was going to be our candidate, and then he had to have surgery, and then we thought maybe Jesse Johnson would be the person. So I left the convention being the candidate for governor. And actually, the reason the people who were really pushing for me to do it was because I had experience. And the interesting thing is I have more legislative experience than all the other candidates combined. And what I find somewhat sobering is I'm the only candidate running for governor who has any experience, hands-on experience, balancing the budget. And with our budget crisis, we had to have the legislature come into a special session trying to find money. I find that very pertinent and important at this particular election cycle, that we have someone who understands what the agencies, when they bring their budgets in, they have to have, each agency kind of is like you're asking your dad or your mom for allowances. Okay, Mom, I need this, or Dad, I need this much money. And so that's what the Finance Committee did, and I did that for 4 years when I was in the House. And that's what we need right now, is someone who has a voting record also for the people. The other candidates who are running, the ones running under Republican and Democrat, are both basically corporate candidates who are interested in extractive industries and pushing coal and hydrofracking. And I'm the only candidate, I think, running who's really putting people first, and I have a 8-year record with 100% for senior citizens and 100% with AFL-CIO and United Mine Workers, but also 100% with the environment. So I'm somewhat of an interesting hybrid, and I think that I fit perfectly with the Mountain Party, because the Mountain Party has the FDR, Democrat, Roosevelt, for working people and for social justice. And then you have the Teddy Roosevelt Republicans also in the Mountain Party, who was for our parks and the environment. And we find with the Mountain Party, we're so issue oriented that we have room for every other party in our party platform. So the Defender of the People, which was the name that I was dubbed when I was in the legislature, the legislative services, who will do a bio on all the different senators and delegates, honored me. I had no idea they were going to do this, but they called me the Defender of the People because of my clear voting record on behalf of children and seniors and working people, and basically people who did not have an opportunity to be at the plate.
Well, let's get into the first of these issues, and your opening kind of leads me perfectly into my first question about the state budget. This summer, lawmakers spent several weeks in a special budget session trying to close a more than $400 million budget gap. The one fix, the one revenue increasing measure they did approve was an increase to the state cigarette tax. Should you become the next governor of the state of West Virginia, where would you find new sources of revenue for the state?
First of all, cigarette tax, food tax, gasoline tax are all taxes on the poor, especially in West Virginia, because we find that we have a demographic with, a lot of poor people or smoke. They still smoke. And with our transportation issues here, we don't have a lot of transportation, public transit like you do in New York City. We have to actually travel quite a bit. So what would I do? I would stay away from taxing poor people. Because we have enough of that already. And I would be taxing, I would put a $1 per 1,000 cubic feet on every bit of gas going out of here. Of course, you know that I'm against hydrofracking. When I see that Martin O'Malley, governor of Maryland, sent in people to look at what was happening, his staff to look at what was happening in West Virginia and Doddridge and north central West Virginia, his staff was so horrified they went back to Maryland, and Maryland banned hydrofracking. The New York physicians looked at what was happening to people who were exposed to the hydrofracking, whether it was the backflow compressors or the water at the wells being contaminated with it. They banned hydrofracking. The New York physicians did that. Of course, we have France and Germany banning it. So when we talk about hydrofracking or fracking or coal as being the future or supporting that, we're really talking about making West Virginians decide between jobs and health. Jobs and drinking water, jobs and the environment, and that's simply unfair. I'm the only candidate who's saying that's hogwash. We need to support what's here, but we need to make certain we have regulations that are going to protect the drinking water, because let's face it, if we're all dead, what difference does it make if we have jobs? And it's also a part of my Native American heritage. I have some Potawatomi and Cherokee and Irish and some German Jewish, and you name it, I've got it out there, Scotch. It's a part of my heritage as a Native American heritage to look at generations, like 6 or 7 generations forward, not just looking at what can we do now and how much money can we make. That's not who West Virginians are.
But you think an increased severance tax on natural gas? Yes,
absolutely. We need to do that. When I served on the Finance Committee, I found out that we did not really have a severance tax on coal. Why? What people say, of course we do. Well, no, we didn't, because we were the only place in the world in which the severance tax on coal was used to offset the corporate net income tax and the franchise tax that they should have been paying everywhere else in the world. So in West Virginia, we have been held hostage. We have been in bondage by these extractive industries that are owned by people outside, many times the country, not even out, in our own country, but certainly outside the state. Whether it's been timber, it's been coal, now it's gas. Dangerous, very dangerous jobs. And my father died of black lung. He was president of United Mine Workers Local 1766 and a safety committee man. So I understand from the very part of my soul the conundrum we're in, or the paradox we're in, where our fathers, our brothers, sometimes our sisters go in the mines, our uncles, they go in the mines because they want to make certain that their children have a better life, that they have food on the table, that they can go to college. And it's not fair for West Virginians to have to sacrifice their family members in order for them to be able to eat or go to school. Now, my economic development package, and it's www.charlottepritt4gov.com, delineates what I would propose as the governor and what it would have to do. Number one, it has to be renewable and sustainable. You'll see that I'm very much in legalizing and decriminalizing medical marijuana and for adult personal use, just like they have in Colorado. Colorado is doing incredibly well. And hemp, hemp products that we could use. Cold Creek, that manufacturing place at Coldwater Creek in Wood County, and we have that Walmart down in McDowell County where we can process hemp and make the 26,000 different products. Hempcrete, shoes, clothing. We did that during World War II, and we were one of the largest producers of hemp. So we can do it again. And also number two, that it has to be for equitable. I mean, this thing of bringing in these industries and a few people, CEOs making all this money is hogwash. We need to make certain that West Virginians can be in on the profit, and they have the equal potential to really be in financial prosperity. And number three, it has to be ecologically sound so that we have an incredibly beautiful state. And if it is going to be destroying our drinking water and destroying the land and destroying the air, then we're not going to do it. Because we have beautiful mountains, we have beautiful air, and we have incredible tourism all over the state for potential for that. So I'm going to fight for making certain that West Virginians are the ones who are going to benefit rather than these corporations that have been coming in here for centuries and holding us hostage. And the other thing I want to do is making certain that we reinstate prevailing wage, that every penny, and I mean penny, I grew up in poverty, so I knew the difference from buying a can of pinto beans and buying a 10-pound bag of pinto beans, that we know how to spend the money and get to the same result. Or at least I do. I'm not a billionaire or millionaire, so I've had to really look at how I spend the money. We're using West Virginia tax dollars. We're hemorrhaging. We're using West Virginia tax dollars, millions of West Virginia tax dollars for out-of-state contractors and out-of-state workers. We need to reinstate prevailing wage, and we need to get rid of right to work for less, because we know what that is here in West Virginia. We need to focus on making certain that we have farmers first, that locally grown organic food goes into our schools and goes to any institution where West Virginia taxpayers' money are. So we're going to be looking at locally grown. I'm going to be going after every penny out there on the national level. You know, I did a grant write. I was a grant writer and brought in money to West Virginia for our schools. And there's all kinds of money out there. So I'm going to take that clean power plant money, the clean power money, and I'm going to make certain that West Virginia workers are learning over there at Ghent. We have New River Technology over there, one of the colleges, teaching electrician, plumbing, and how to do solar panels and have a solar farm on these denuded mountaintops, giving West Virginia displaced workers $15 an hour to weatherize and give them the material to first start with their own homes and then start with little old ladies like me that might not have someone to be able to weatherize the home. All of this has to do with West Virginia owning and being able to prosper. So all of my economic development plans, and there are more than that, I mean, there are lots more, but they all talk about West Virginians first and using our tax dollars, recirculating it for our people, and believing in us. You know, I had to make pillowcases and sell them when I was in the 6th grade to go to D.C. with the rest of the kids. I had to work to even pay for my senior pictures and my expenses and my ring. I have had to always work, and most West Virginians have. And guess what? We're the most creative thinkers on the planet. We know how to make certain that we can get to that goal. And one of the things that has really been heartbreaking for me to see how many West Virginians have felt so helpless and so hopeless with what's happened with the economy since I've been out of the legislature. And so many of our young people now are, they're dying from opioid overdose and drug abuse. That should never be happening. West Virginians are some of the spunkiest people, the most creative people. We've been through so much, and we're still standing. We're the only state in which the United States government bombed its own people when the miners were marching on Blair Mountain. They got bombed, but you know what? We're still here, aren't we? We are still here.
So let's talk a little bit about, you've laid out for us a lot of economic diversification plans, and that's wonderful, but let's talk about the converse side of the budget and cutting government spending. Can you give for me an example of a place where you believe the state could still cut back?
Well, the out-of-state contracting, all of that, millions. Well, I'll give you an example. DHHR, we're contracting out, I think it's JK Staffing in Florida, and paying $10,000 per nurse finder's fee. When we have nurses right here in West Virginia, we're paying them twice as much. We're paying them $54 an hour. We're paying our own nurses $23 an hour. We're also paying room and board for them. And guess what? If they stay more than 13 weeks, we paid JK Staffing in Florida another $10,000 per nurse. That's outrageous.
So you're talking about cutting back on contractors. You mentioned to me
Out-of-state contractors.
Out-of-state contractors, excuse me. So
and also, let me just say, since I know the budget, how to work with the budget, you can't just say, I'm going to cut this and that. That's just absolutely irresponsible. Each agency comes in, and you work with the agency. You see where we can make differences here. Okay, like I said, all right, we used to be able to buy a can of pinto beans. We can't do that now. How can we still feed? How can we still make certain that the same goal gets handled? Well, you buy a 10-pound bag of pinto beans. It takes a little longer to cook it, but you can feed many more people at less than the cost perhaps than a couple of cans of beans. So it's that kind of really compassionate decision making. And working with the people on the front lines to say, okay, what do we need to do here? To say, I'm going to cut this and that, that's completely irresponsible for someone to say that unless they have really worked with the state agencies. And that's what I will do. And I hope that I get a chance to work with Mary Ann Claytor. She has 20 years of experience in the auditor's office, and we've already talked about if we get a situation where we can work in there, we'll be able to find the money that we need. Also, these the millions of dollars, like $17 million a year that we take on arresting and incarcerating people for cannabis, for marijuana, for nonviolent crimes, $17 million a year. I'm going to decriminalize that. I'm going to pardon every person who's in our prison for a nonviolent crime concerning cannabis. It's ridiculous to be putting people and praying and feeding this prison industry. We need to get out of that. I don't want to get back to Barney Fife and Andy Griffith. I don't want this kind of thing that we're doing to our people.
Let's talk a little bit about the state's substance abuse epidemic, because the governor this week announced that the state would follow new opioid prescribing guidelines that came from the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. And those guidelines basically say that doctors should not consider prescription opioids as the first treatment for chronic pain. So tell us what other things you think are necessary to do. What other steps could you take as governor to fight the opioid epidemic here in West Virginia?
Well, the first step is have economic opportunities. Most of our people are depressed and feel hopeless because they've looked to both parties and neither one of them have helped. We've had governors that are Democratic, we have legislators that are Republican, and they both have failed. So one of the things that I would do is, and I've been talking to people on the front lines. I've been talking to people who are addicts, and I ask, you're a heroin addict. What happened? How did this happen to you? It started with prescription drugs. And why are we allowing that? How many of these opioids came in? Our state allowed that came in. It was like they actually just flooded the market with it. And one of the persons said they did this with cocaine initially. They brought in, speed, the uppers, and then they took it off the market and they flooded us with cocaine. He said the same thing. This person was prescribed Oxycontin about 5 or 6 years ago. So this is like liquid heroin. It is so amazing. What they're going to do is they're going to take it off the market and they're going to flood West Virginia and other places with heroin. And they're already doing it. I talked to this person again about a month ago and said, what is going on out there? And they said, well, the Mexican cartel is in here and they're selling heroin. Heroin is cheaper than Oxycontin. Oxycontin is much more expensive on the black market now. Heroin is cheaper, and the heroin that they're bringing in is not pure. It's laced with stuff, and it's killing people. So someone created this problem. And what we need to do as a governor, what I need to do, and what I plan to have economic development, I plan to legalize and decriminalize medical marijuana, which people are finding that a fourth of the people who are on drug addiction, or opiates rather, a fourth of them got off just simply by using medical marijuana rather than prescribing these pain pills. So that gets back to the natural substance, gets away from big pharma, and big pharma is involved in this. Let's not be naive. Big pharma is involved, and I think it's one of the reasons the legislature has not passed a legalization and decriminalization of medical marijuana like other states. I was also an investment marketer for an investment firm, independent marketer for an investment firm. And this is what I know about how wealthy people use their money. They never put all their eggs in one basket like we have in West Virginia, just extractive industries and not allowing diversification. They always diversify their stock portfolio and they do something else. They always are abreast of current trends. What's going on in the other states around us, where the whole country is looking at what Colorado's doing and they're going to legalizing and all that. And West Virginia supposedly is one of the best places on the planet, that it's just, they can't get rid of it. We're spending all this money to get rid of it. Why don't we keep it?
We have just about 1 minute left, and so in these final moments, I do want to make sure you have an opportunity to tell the voters of West Virginia why it is they should vote for you.
Well, I just want to say that people talk about the lesser of two evils. In this race, the two people are both, like the Democrat and Republican, are both supported by and will put forth the Koch brother agenda, both of them. There's really no difference. I say it's like the same side of a coin, both tails, at trick coin. And the important thing is for people to know that when you vote for someone, you are giving them a mandate. And if you vote for the lesser, in your mind, of two evils, you're voting for something, you're giving them a mandate to continue hydrofracking, to continue extractive industries, to continue incarcerating people, all of these things, that whatever they stand for. If you vote for Charlotte Pritt, and who's against hydrofracking, who's against mountaintop removal, who is for decriminalization, who has a very different agenda, then you are saying to the public, you give me a mandate. If you vote for me, you give me a mandate to do these wonderful things that we need to do for West Virginia. If you don't give me your vote, then you're giving someone else a mandate, and they will use that. So I'm asking people, vote for Charlotte Pritt. She's been there for you, whether it's been on the picket line down in Logan during the piston strike, for the United Mine Workers when they called her. She's been there for the senior citizens because she took care of her grandmother when she was young, 100% voting record. Her experiences as a person and her legislative voting record is very clear that she puts people first. Now I need for them to put me first and vote November 8th for Charlotte Pritt.
Thank you so much, Charlotte Pritt, the Mountain Party candidate for governor. We've reached the end of our Viewpoint Gubernatorial Forum, and I want to thank all of the candidates who participated. You can find the latest election news on our website, wvpublic.org. That's also where you can find our weekly political podcast, Viewpoint. From all of us here at West Virginia Public Broadcasting, thanks for joining us.
From West Virginia Public Broadcasting.